Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a quick spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On today's episode, Money Moicano ruins the party in Paris, France. The UFC is lighter in the pocket, some $375 million, pending a Nevada judge's approval. And the Delta Center will be rocking on Saturday. No, I'm not talking about the Utah Jazz. Get real, dog. They only won like 31 games last year. I'm talking about UFC 307. They will be there, the fighters, the promotion, and we're here to talk about it. Hello, everyone. Gorgeous George here on the con, and look at the distinguished panel we have for you today. It's Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He just celebrated his 3500th episode last week. Check it out here on YouTube on this channel. Just go to the live section and you'll see it. A lot of great guests. Dan Tom joins us as well. He is our fight analyst, and he has an excellent podcast of his own called Protect Ya Neck. Check it out. He's getting in that 400, 500 range as well and doing it for over a decade. The man knows what he's talking about. And Nolan King, he's here with us this week as well. He's been nominated for the best journalist at the World MMA Awards. Today's the last day to vote. I'll tell you more about that towards the end. Kamikaze's on the ones and twos. We need to get going. Paris, France, merci. You guys brought it. You guys know how to rock an arena. It was a great event, capped by a one-sided main event as Renato Moicano defeated Benoit Saint-Denis via TKO, doctor stoppage, courtesy of a beatdown. So, guys, I need a reaction to that ass whooping, and Goes, you're in the leadoff spot.
Well, look, I was one of those guys that thought that fight was going to go a complete. That was. Oh, I'm back. All right. Wait, are we good? Yeah, we're good, right?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. So like I was saying, I thought that fight was going to go complete. I know, right? I thought that fight was going to go a completely different way, guys. I'll be honest with you. But that's a huge win from Moicano, like a big win for him. And not just that, it's a big win for the division, because the division kind of needs a little bit of fresh blood, right? You have this bubble that's got these fighters that we're just so used to seeing inside of the bubble, but you have these guys that are outside kind of threatening, trying to fight their way in. And when you look at what's been going on, like if you go back a year, you look at Benoit Saint-Denis, and this is a guy that we all thought would be in a different position at this time. So I love storylines going into fights. And so for this fight to play out the way it did, I thought it caught a lot of people by surprise. But man, Renato Moicano, I can't say enough about this guy, like turning his career around and really just taking charge of his own career. I think he sent a message to the rest of the roster, right? He sent a message to the fans. He sent a huge message to Paris. At the end of the day, I know a lot of people don't like to see fights end the way that one ended, but I feel like they made the right decision. I mean, that was a pretty battered fighter, and we want these guys to continue fighting. We've often heard fighters say sometimes they can point to a particular matchup where they say, that one right there, I never came back the same. I look at that fight, and I look at what happened to Benoit Saint-Denis, and that might be his fight where he says something like that. So maybe that doctor saved him from what could have been even worse. But overall, I had a blast.
Dan, how about you, man? You've covered Moicano for many years. Renato Moicano, now Money Moicano, a whole other fighter in a different weight class. He looked damn good on Saturday.
Yeah, man. He had some, potential, maybe, fragility or chin issues. Maybe, he was going against Zombie and Aldo down at 45. And when he came into Junkie Radio, guys, you guys know this, we were surprised at how big Moicano was, right? So perhaps seeing him up at 55, seeing him find success, maybe not the craziest thing in the world, but boy, am I impressed. And, I got to say, I'm all about the fights, but boy, is his post-fight speeches turning in just as fun as his performances. I mean, could you imagine if you got Moicano as like a substitute teacher, which, by the way, the Money Moicano History Hour needs to happen in my life, right? We need him. Listen, motherfuckers, you're going to throw your books away and we're going to open up to page 7. Like he just says, we're just shouting lessons at you. Like, oh my gosh, I need more of it in my life. Let's get more Moicano here.
Yeah, I hear you, man. A completely different guy, not just because he went up 10 pounds, his persona. Nolan King, how about you, man? What did you think? We got 2 minutes of fight time, and arguably Benoit Saint-Denis won round 2, but round 1 clear 10-8, and the man couldn't even see at the end. That's a pretty hard L to take in general, but in front of your home country, it's got to really sting.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very big surprise to me. I'm not going to pretend like I thought that was going to happen. just totally outclassed Benoit on the ground, pummeled him. I mean, both of his eyes were swollen so badly. There's cuts all over his face. So just really incredible. And going into that fight, I felt like a dogfight, getting in a back and forth sort of war where we've seen him be very durable in the past at times. And we've also seen him get finished. But I guess the kryptonite would be that you don't even have to get in a dogfight, that you can just, in the first 10 seconds of the fight, just be able to grab hold of your opponent, super crafty takedown right off the bat, and just capitalized on that opportunity, man. Like, he went for it. You know, there was no waiting around. There was no, okay, we're in round one, I got to conserve my energy. Like, no, he sliced right through him, literally and figuratively, to get that big first round that ultimately proved to be all that mattered, even though that second round was just kind of a bit of a staring contest. And even more impressive too, doing it with the shoulder injury as well, that separated shoulder that he sustained probably, he said 3 weeks ago. I'd heard about 5 or 6, but still, I mean, the thing was visibly out of place. It was still injured. It was still raw. So super, super impressive. His stock's never been higher. Great job afterwards too, capitalizing on the opportunity, mentioning Dan Hooker with a pretty funny line on the post-fight show. I don't know if you guys saw it, about, you know, Dan Hooker's like a turtle in a tree. You see him up there, you wonder who put him up there. And he's talking about Dan Hooker's placement in the rankings, saying, you know, he didn't earn that. People just put him there. So great job there. He maintained the Paddy rivalry, or whatever you want to call it, as well. But I think he's kind of, to be honest with you, kind of past that a little bit. Maybe it can align if Paddy wins again and what kind of loses or something. But I think that Hooker fight's perfect, especially if, you know, it doesn't sound like he's going to have surgery from some of the things that I was reading. But who knows? So if they're healthy, Moicano versus Hooker, I know it's a fight they've tried to make in the past. So the UFC probably likes that from a style perspective. And I think now is a absolutely perfect time to put that on a pay-per-view main card.
Yeah, that was amazing when I saw that X-ray. Good friend of the show, Kevin Aioli, had put that out. I was like, how did he fight with that? Because I think in the first round that occurred, how is he so cool there as he's yapping it up with Bisping? Then he went to the desk with Bisping, Anthony Smith, and Karen Bryant. Then he did his normal, you know, post-fight stuff in the back, and all looking cool, like nothing was going on. And yet that looked pretty severe, man. But like you said, you've thrown out a few, Nolan, so I'll stick with you. Pimlet or Hooker, which do you prefer? Because Pimlet, that guy's, you know, a juggernaut on his own, obviously. Like, Pimlet in England is massive, right? Or maybe even New York. And Hooker, to be fair, has earned his way back with some nice key wins. It's not like he's riding a one-fight win streak. And he's pretty damn popular, and also kind of has that Moicano, I don't know, he appealed to him, and that he's just a tough alley cat. You know what I'm saying? So do you want to stick with one of those two? Do you have a preference? Location? What are you kind of thinking as these cards fill up?
I really like the Hooker fight. I think right now, with the momentum those guys have in that division, it really makes sense for them to propel themselves into the title picture. And I understand, like, I mean, the UFC might look at this and say, hey, like they did with Sean O'Malley, right? Like, it's time to take the training wheels off Paddy Pimblett, give him somebody that people will be almost surprised that we're finally testing this guy against the top of the division. And it will be a fun little banter back and forth sort of thing. But to me, I think right now I'm thinking Hooker and Moicano are like half a step above reaching backward to kind of take that fight in the rankings. And granted, maybe Moicano looks at this and he's like, I don't think that guy's very good. He's behind me. I'll take it. It'll be an easy paycheck and I'll build my brand, which more props to you. But I think for me, the what's on the line here, the stakes, and then also just the action potential of that fight. I think it's a fantastic fight. It's really intriguing, and they do have a little bit of a history as well. So it kind of checks a lot of boxes for me, and I think that's like the merit-based approach to matchmaking would be to put these two together.
Is that refreshing to you that he's not chasing the title? He kind of is managing his career, you know, taking appropriate steps on the way up without putting too much pressure on himself.
Well, I think, you know, that's kind of a formula that he's building for himself. I need a lot of fighters need to look at what he's done. You know, if we go back a few years ago, we weren't talking about Moicano the way we are today. And a lot of that is on him. He builds himself up. He has his, you know, his own podcast, his YouTube channel, all that stuff. Every time he gets that microphone, he makes the best of it. But on top of that, what kind of gets brushed aside is what he's done to his own skills, right? Like, a lot of us haven't really, when we turn in our staff picks, I don't know that a lot of us had Moicano up there. So this guy's doing all the right things I think they do need to pay attention a little bit. I do want to take one comment here, George, from the chat. Frozen Like Elsa says the real discussion must be had. Why didn't Moicano receive a $100,000 bonus, 50 for the post-fight speech and 50 for that 10-7 round? This is something that we talked about on MMA Junkie Radio last night. I don't understand that as well. I thought he should have got a bonus. I mean, at some point, don't you pull the matchmakers aside, you pull Dana, Hunter, and you just say, well, what am I supposed to do? What else could he have done to his opponent? I mean, that opponent, if he would have walked out onto the street, people would have said, oh my God, were you in a car accident? Like, what? Did they throw you off a roof? What happened? He could not have done anything else in that fight. Why doesn't he get a bonus? He deserved a bonus. And on top of that, you know, he's towards the top of, he's one of your, slowly starting to become one of your favorites. You want to make him happy. You see how much these guys get taxed when they go overseas. I just felt like everything made sense to give this guy a bonus. Why he didn't, I don't know, but I think that's an excellent comment, Frozen. Like,
I mean, we saw a bonus for a delayed submission, so I guess this was kind of a weirdly delayed TKO, right? You think it would qualify?
Yeah,
there was 14
we've seen bonuses
fights.
for bites.
There was 14 fights, 6 finishes, but one was ruled out, the twerker, because she was over by half a pound or something, so she takes herself out. 5 finishes. Moicano was the one left out, and like you said, Goes, I mean, he took a beating. He looked like Max Cady from the movie Cape Fear, except 3 guys did that to him, and they had baseball bats. You know, like, what's going on here? Just, it was $4 million at the gate, 16,000. They're rocking and rolling. Dana White, make the call. Hey, Mick, give them the last bonus. We bonus all finishers here, especially when you're coming off that successful show at the Sphere, man. I don't know. It gets my juices flowing, man, when it comes to these bonuses and these fighters going out there and doing special things. And Moicano did something pretty, you know, that was a beatdown that he gave BSD. BSD's no joke. Dan, let me go to you regarding Benoit Saint-Denis. That's 2 beatings in a row that he's taken. How do you take what do you do with this guy so that you don't just completely thrash him? Is this like 9 months off, almost like a Volkanovski? Hey, we just don't want to even see you till mid-year 2025 because we got to preserve you. You're an asset to the company.
I mean, definitely not till you know, closer to mid-year 2025. It might sound extreme because he didn't get put out, folks, but it's those concussive blows that are often the worst. And Saint-Denis takes a lot of damage in his fights. He's been pushed really hard. He's had a decent schedule, and I think we forget, you know, these guys look like they're the same age, or maybe Saint-Denis with his burly beard and military experience, we think he's older. Like, he's still in his 20s. He's still a young guy. So I completely agree with that. You know, doctor's prescription, if you will, there, George.
All right. And Nasruddin Imavov in the co-main event defeated Brendan Allen, kind of ruining that nice run that Allen had. And of course, Nasruddin Imavov, minus that Sean Strickland decision loss he had a while back, he's kind of had a pretty good run himself, like 7 out of 8 or whatever. Let's talk about that. Let's get the reaction. We'll go back to Dan, Tom for that. Did you see that one coming?
Yeah, so I guess I feel like the safest bet for this one was the over, but my pick was of course incorrect. I did take Allen, which I guess looked good at the beginning, but he stayed on his takedown plan, which wasn't necessarily the worst thing, especially if this were a 5-round fight, which, by the way, you know, whatever is next for Moicano, make it 5 rounds because we need more 5-round lightweight main events. We get overly drowned with middleweight main events. In case you guys haven't noticed, literally 60% of our schedule is rematches or middleweight main events, especially when it's at the Apex. Always got to have rematches, like one every other card now. So please no more rematches. Please no more middleweight main events. That being said, the ironic part is this one could have been the middleweight main event. I know it wasn't exciting, so perhaps this opinion doesn't age well in hindsight, but I feel like this was an important fight for the division as far as, you know, making a potential new contender. So, you know, even though whether you were surprised or not, I think you got to kind of make lemons with lemonade here. And either way, you're going to get another kind of fresh face. And maybe Imavov isn't next in the logjam that is middleweight, but I think that he makes for an interesting title contender right now.
Right on, my man. All right. And Nolan, unpack that middleweight division because we know, well, it appears Strickland's next, although he's saying, I'm not going to South Africa. Who knows how that'll pan out? And then we got Whitaker and Shemaev on deck, and then a guy named Kyle Barrios making some noise. So maybe Imavov doesn't obviously walk into a title shot, even though he took out a title contender. What would you do next with him?
I kind of like the Izzy fight. I know that's something that people have been floating. I don't know how much Izzy would be necessarily excited to do that, but I think, again, if this was a merit-based approach, I think it would be a good reset opportunity for Izzy, and it would be a huge fight for Imavov too, to prove himself against, you know, another tier of a name. So I think that's a fight that's out there. And middleweight's in a weird place. You know, I think the Vettori versus Brendan Allen fight will be next and kind of sells itself. But in terms of like the immediate title picture, I mean, you got Dricus and Strickland, who's rematching. You got Izzy right there. You've got Whitaker. You got Chimaev, who, like, where does he fit? How's this whole thing going to go down with him? So it's in a weird spot right now. But I do think that for Adesanya, that Imavov would serve. Again, it's not an easy fight, but he's going to have to test himself against somebody, and this would be a good opportunity for him to kind of get some momentum again, and start to build back up to get a title shot again.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, Allen and Vettori does appear to be a slam dunk as long as both guys just get healthy. I know Vettori had a shoulder injury himself, but I think he's more on the mend. So I think that's just too hard to pass up. But let's highlight someone else from this card, either a person or something that took place out in Paris, France, because like I said, they really brought it out there. What do you want to put a spotlight from the UFC Paris show?
I thought, well, for one, the crowd was ridiculous. I thought they did a tremendous job just making every fight feel like it was important. But you know what, man? My man Brian Battle is starting to grow on me a little bit, and cutting that promo at the end, Jesus, that guy went completely off the rails. But I think this is a guy, you know, we're always talking about Dana White's Contender Series and all the people that are being built through there. This is somebody that came off the Ultimate Fighter, and it's nice to see a little bit of that side of the UFC getting a little bit of love and some of these fighters being a little bit more successful.
Dan, Tom, how about you, man? Who do you want to put a spotlight on from that card out in Paris?
You know, I almost want to put a spotlight on some of the judging, man. That William Gomes Brito decision, but I want to put it on. Even though it was a real setup fight, you know, I really liked what Charrier was able to do, and as well as Ziem. I think they, you know, especially Ziem. You know, I know that, you know, Frevola maybe didn't look his best out there, but you want to give the fighter his flowers, and Ziem really looked like he took it to a new level, and I want to see him matched up higher in the rankings for sure. I'm sure they'll throw him up faster than they'll throw a guy they're trying to protect up like Patty to weigh in on that. But yeah, I would love to see just Ziem go up the ranks no matter who he fights next. And
Nolan, ora tu.
That crowd, man, it's incredible. Paris has really emerged as just an absolute hub of MMA. To think like a handful of years ago, it wasn't even legal there. It was being battled to get some sort of commission, to have it viewed in the same light as boxing. And ultimately, like right before the pandemic, it happened, but then the pandemic happened. So we got some delays, but there were some signs, man. They built stars on that regional scene. There were guys that were fighting for Aries and some other organizations there that were like superstars. You know, Morgan was one of them. And you know, Lazy King was another one, and Cedric Doumbé. And these guys hadn't had any UFC, any PFL experience or anything. And you went to social media and it was like they were the biggest thing going. They were all like Conor McGregor's in France. So I'm glad that the UFC's capitalized on it. Bellator's held and PFL have held very successful shows there as well. But that atmosphere is incredible. And I know we've always looked at Ireland and Dublin as kind of the number one. But unfortunately for them, they really haven't had the opportunity to show it recently. So, I mean, right now, and in terms of the best crowds to fight in front of, I think Paris and the French crowd is probably what most fighters, if they want that raucous environment to fight in front of, look no further than them.
I knew the French would come through one day. They've always had some great fighters. I don't know if you ever saw Eric Cantona on that kick to the fan in the English Premier League in the mid-90s, but something told me these guys, you don't want to mess with them. I want to give a shout out to the doctor. That cannot be easy when you go in to a crowd that is as animated, as pumped as they are, even though they had the weather through like 8 decisions, right? He did a good job in assessing Benoit Saint-Denis. He didn't just phone it in. He looked like he gave him a bunch of tests with both eyes, with one eye closed, and then he had to make the hard decision, disappointing the crowd, but it was the right decision. Man, both of his eyes were really bad. One of them was completely closed, and that's why he could tell you're reading the finger using the other eye. And then he had a really bad cut on one of the lids. So kudos to the doctor. That's not easy. I've seen others get bullied into letting them continue. Benoit Saint-Denis wanted to continue, but it just wasn't the right thing to do. He really, really saved them, man. The vision is just something you want to protect. The guy that's sitting octagon side calling the fights, Michael Bisping, ask him about eye injuries and the impact they can have on the rest of your life. So yeah, good job to that ref, a fist bump to him. We must continue, though. We got to get to our next topic, guys. TKO Group Holdings and the plaintiffs from Lee versus Zuffa have appeared to reach another deal, this time worth $375 million, up from the $335 million earlier this year, which was deemed not enough by Judge Peter Boulware. To be clear, the first deal was for both Lee versus Zuffa and Johnson versus Zuffa. And again, this current deal is only for the former, Lee versus Zuffa. Here to help us unpack all this is John Nash, who has a podcast and newsletter called Hey, Not the Face. He's covered these types of stories for a long time in our sport. I'm a fan, and he does an excellent job. Welcome, John, and please start off by sharing your reaction to this new deal that's, again, not official, but it's now out there, $375 million for the Lee versus Zuffa.
Well, I mean, you can't get too excited either way because the judge has to approve it. And the judge made it clear he is not going to, he's not going to delay the trial that's set for February unless he approves this. So I just wait and see. There's, everybody got a little ahead of themselves. I think last settlement, thinking it was all over. The judge made it clear that that's not the case. So I am going to wait and see what he has to say. But it's definitely an improvement. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's been improved over the previous settlement from the fighter's point of view, but I'm still not certain it's enough to, satisfy the judge's demands.
Could the judge have guided them by saying, at least this is what I'm looking for, or is that unethical? I mean, I don't know, because when you say I don't think it's enough, it sounds like you have a number in mind of what is.
Well, I mean, it might be enough for this judge. I just don't know. He did say last they had a hearing, and he commented that what he would like to see, or not that we'd like to see, that he pointed out that he granted class certification for a case that was asking from $811 million to $1.6 billion. And if they won in trial, trebling it, the settlement for Lee at the time would have been about 10% what they potentially could have won on treble damages. So that implies that, he thinks it should be a much higher amount. But he could approve this. We don't know. He might look at this because his other big problem was that Johnson and Lee were put together as one case, which they have conflicts of interest. Lee is the older case, fighters from 2010 to 2017. They're basically, all the fighters in that group are done fighting. What they're looking for is monetary compensation. Johnson is 2017 on. They're looking for two things. One is monetary compensation, but also some form of injunctive relief that would change the business model of the UFC so there'd be more competition going forward, that they have more opportunity. So they split that. That's good news for, what the judge wanted to see. But the question is the monetary amount. Is this going to be enough to satisfy what he indicated? Now, he can come out and say the high-tech Silicon Valley case, the judge basically, when they had a settlement, he said it wasn't enough, and I think you should add 60 million to that to get my approval. He could very well say that. And the good news is, in some ways, maybe this is not the settlement the judge wants to see. But the two litigant parties might have thought, let's put forward the settlement now, several months before the trial, because if he doesn't agree to it, he can indicate what he finds wrong with it, and then maybe we can work out a deal before the trial. So there's that possibility, too, that they just wanted to get some sort of settlement, a new offer on the table, as close as they can get between the two parties, just to see what the judge's reaction to it is.
Did I get that right? Where at the beginning of the $335 million, it was both cases, and they say it goes from 335 to 375, but it feels like there's a $75 million lift, because I think between the two cases, most of the money was going to the first one, right? Lee versus Zuffa. Of the $335 million, was there an exact number of what was going their way? I heard 80%.
The split originally the split was 70-30 for Lee Zuffa. Then they adjusted it to make the judge happy, 90-10. So Lee would have got $193 million. The rest would have gone to the Johnson class. But this settlement, which is 90% of, if you take the 40 million increase and then 90% of the original 335, that comes out to 73.5 million more for the Lee class, which is, I mean, I know a lot. You look at the 811 to 1.6 billion that they're asking for. It's still a small fraction of that, but for the fighters in the class, there are, many of them that probably look at that like a sizable amount of money right now.
Were you surprised at how all this has played out at the speed that it's going? because like you said, they were asking for a lot more early on, but again, that was a long time ago.
Well, they were asking a lot more in the trial, not in the settlement. You always negotiate down. The thing people got to be aware of when you go into very few antitrust cases and class action cases go, especially class action cases, go to trial because the risk is so dangerous for both parties. For the UFC, they do not want to go to trial because the damages they have to pay will be trebled. They really didn't want to go to trial when injunctive relief was on the table. That's the triple damages, and the fact that their business model could be changed was, which would just destroy the business that they have if they lose. That's something they didn't want to face. They want to settle. From the fighter's point of view, remember, this is a federal trial. They have to get all 8 jurors to agree with them to win. If 1 or 2 jurors sit out, they don't win the trial. They have a split jury, and they'd have to go back and retrial. So they technically lose because they don't win. And on top of that, they've spent 10 years on this case. The attorneys do not get paid. They only get paid if the fighters win. The attorneys are paying for this case. So the attorneys, the law firms sponsoring the fighters, they've spent tens of millions of dollars on legal experts, travel, hotels, data code entry for all the documents. They have over 1 million UFC documents they had to go through, and plus tens of thousands, well over 100,000 hours of work, unbilled work they have right now. And so from their point of view, it's like the risk for them is we could go to trial and end up with nothing except a huge debt we've incurred. So both sides have tremendous risk. They want to settle. The way you settle is who has the most leverage going into negotiations. Losing injunctive relief took a lot of leverage away from the fighters in Lee. But if you're a person upset that there's no potential contract change, the good news for the fighters is, yes, they don't have injunctive relief for Lee, but because Johnson's been split off and no longer settled, Johnson could potentially get a bigger settlement or a bigger win in trial, but also potentially could get injunctive relief again because that class has they have standing, barring if there's some decision on those arbitration agreement class action waivers.
Our guest is John Nash, and again, podcast and newsletter, Hey Not the Face. You can also follow him on Twitter at Hey Not the Face. He's done a great job of covering this for a long time in our sport. Used to write for Bloody Elbow. Guys, I know you want to weigh in on this. What do you have for John Nash?
John, so initially when the first round was done, we a lot of us felt like maybe the UFC kind of ran out the clock, as we say in other sports, right? What we don't know too much about is we know a company like that probably has excellent representation, but on the other side, on the fighter side, what do you know about their representation and how well versed are they in these types of situations?
Sorry to interrupt you, George. I can't hear Goes. For some reason, it's just a lot of static on his end, on this side.
Was he talking about his commanders from Washington again? Or oh, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, so what he was saying is the representation from the fighter side, are they of well reputation? Have they done other types of cases like this and had successes, or what do you know about them?
Oh yeah, I mean there's huge firms that handle this consistently, and they do multiple cases that have won large amounts of money. I mean, that's one of the reasons when this case was filed, the people that pay attention to antitrust thought the fighters had a potential chance because these are deep pocket firms. These are not, fly by night operations. So these are guys that do this nonstop against major companies like Google and just major companies and consistently get $100 million plus rewards. So yeah, they're not, they have some of the best plaintiff law antitrust litigants working with them.
Nolan King, what do you have for John Nash?
I think I heard John touch on it at the end of one of his answers there, but you had mentioned the arbitration waiver hearings. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, because there's 2 classes, the Lee class early from 210 to 217, and then the Johnson class. After the 2 classes were split, when they created a separate class, Johnson, the UFC introduced arbitration agreements, class action waivers. What they are is when you sign a UFC contract, you have to sign this. It says you will not take the UFC to court for any contractual problems. You will go to an arbitrator instead, and you cannot participate in a mass lawsuit or class action. You have to individually go to arbitration. So that eliminates huge numbers of fighters from the class action lawsuit right now. That's why the Johnson class was a much weaker lawsuit, because large numbers of fighters were banned from participating in the class action. So the potential damages were less. And then there's a question, can they even ask for injunctive relief? Because if all the current fighters have this class action waiver, then the class that's in the antitrust case, that class action, none of them have standing to ask for changes in the contract. So the judge, he asked them to split. He also basically demanded that the plaintiff's attorneys challenge these arbitration agreements. Now, there's no guarantee they can succeed, but they're going to have to try to go to like the Ninth Circuit and get them overturned so these fighters can participate in the class action, which would greatly increase the pool of fighters that are eligible for damages, greatly increasing the potential damages to the UFC, but also greatly increasing the potential number of fighters that could get a damage payment for this. So it's all up in the air. This will take, the Johnson class is just at the beginning phase. They just started discovery. It's going to take several years.
Dan, Tom, what do you have for John Nash?
Great explanations as far as the class separations, and I guess as far as the money or potential money, I guess we should say. Part of me, I've been kind of like listening to this podcast following the Google antitrust. I heard you mention Google, John, and I can't help but hear all these parallels, right? Where they're coming at Google talking about, well, when you have this much market share, you notice quality goes down, right? And they're talking about, you know, both their monopolies and how they've treated it. And anybody who follows the UFC can see parallels there. So in regards to this case, though, and from a legal perspective, are there any parallels from either that case or other cases you referenced off the top of your segment here, John, that like anything you can, you know, kind of draw from, you know, for analysis purposes or for forecasting, any kind of trends or parallels?
Okay, Dan, I had the same problem as you before. I couldn't hear it. I'm guessing you asked that not enough people pull guard anymore, and what's my opinion on that? But I could be mistaken about that.
You didn't hear any of it?
No, for some reason, only
he said,
Weird.
Okay, he said parallels between the Google case and the UFC case, if you see any there between the two. And hopefully I got that right, Dan. If not, let me know in the chat and I can add to it.
Well, I imagine you mean the more current Google case and not the high-tech silicon worker case, which is that's the case. That case, the high-tech silicon employee case, is the one I see more comparisons to, because that was where, even though it wasn't one firm like the UFC, it was multiple companies in Silicon Valley colluding to say we are not going to hire other people's employees to keep wages low. But between this and the Google case, not in this case. I mean, you could make an argument that there's some comparisons because the UFC has bound together all these elements in the scheme, as they call it, kind of like how Google has used algorithms and YouTube and tied all these business models together, but not much besides that.
John, in the end, what do you think is the expected outcome, at least through your lenses, now that you've kind of seen in the direction it's gone, the pushback from the judge, and now the new numbers that have been thrown out? And do you think it will be good or bad for the fighters?
Well, I think the odds are we might not get a settlement with this offer, this proposal. But I guess the next step, if the judge indicates it's close, then we might get one that's a little bit higher. And then we'll have a settlement and Johnson will continue. If the judge indicates he wants something much higher, then we're definitely going to trial. So, but if there is a settlement, or if there's a trial and the fighters win, if the fighters lose, obviously it's not good for the fighters. But if the fighters win, it's maybe not, if the settlement stands, maybe it's not the massive win for the Lee fighters that a lot of people were hoping for, this huge billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar award. But it would be, you know, I calculated based on the $375 million. Attorney fees take up a third. They basically, there's a limit to how much they can take. So it'll be about a third of the winnings. So $250 million for all the fighters in the Lee class. So that would mean that if they use the same allocation as the last time, every fighter would, if you're a fighter out there, all you have to do is total up the total amount you made during the Lee class period, December 16th, 2010 to June 30th, 2017. Take your show, your win, your side letter agreements, your discretionary locker room bonuses, your fight of the nights, put all those together. 30% of that would be your total compensation. So you take 30% of that, that's your damages. Plus, for every fight you had during that period, you'd get another about $14,000. So if you fought 10 times in the UFC and made about $500,000, you would be looking at $290,000 in damages after the attorney fees. So, you know, it's not the massive damages, I think, that some fans were holding out for and some fighters, but I know, talking to a lot of fighters, I know a lot would be happy to have something like that come their way after their fighting, long after their fighting career was done.
John, thank you so much for jumping on here with us and unpacking this. Hopefully we can have you back when there is some finality to this case, or if things proceed, because you're definitely a gift to our audience, man. That was really, really good stuff, putting it in our terms, you know.
I'm very good at dumbing it down. I got to put it at my level. So.
We're fifth graders over here, so yeah, thank you for that. All right, take care,
Thanks
man.
for having me on, guys.
All right,
yeah,
we'll
thanks,
see you.
John.
All right, folks, there you go. So there's a little bit more on that case that kind of took a twist and a turn, I guess, last week when they upped the number there for some of those fighters. I see, comments in the chat. Nobody cares. Well, yeah. Let me put it to you like this, guys. What if you were going to receive 290 million or 180 million or whatever, right? Would you care? So, you know what I mean? Someone cares out there is all I can say. You know what I care about, guys, is face punching. And we get back to it as UFC 307 is on Saturday. It's officially fight week. Goes and I will be hosting a watch along over at MMA Junkie at 8 Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And the main card will continue through that. That's where you decide whether you watch on your own or watch with us, or, let us tell you what's happening. I should say whether you order the pay-per-view or not. 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. I did talk to our colleague Farah Hanoun. She'll be hosting her preview show at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific to get the party started. And UFC 307, guys, is it getting the fair buzz? We do have 2 title fights. Kayla Harrison, one of the free agents that the UFC signed a while back, who had a great debut a few months ago. She's on the card. Legendary Jose Aldo, he's on the card after, coming back to the sport after a couple years and looking impressive down in Rio de Janeiro. You feeling the buzz, Dan Tom?
Yes and no. It's a little tough. I feel like, Noche and Paris almost like had themes to it, right? Whereas this card, we're back in the garden, or not back in back in elevation. UFC's been going there quite a bit to Utah next door. Glad Utah's getting some love, but outside of the 2 title fights, man, it starts to kind of, we got names like Jose Aldo and Kayla Harrison, but the card format is way off, in my opinion. But then again, I look at it and there's only one 155 fight and there's no featherweight fight. So I guess I can't complain for no Joe Silva main card openers. They're going with Roman Dolidze versus Kevin Holland. Like, I mean, I don't know. I almost would dare say I would want that to add to the endless sludge of middleweight Apex 5-rounders that we're getting, than having to trust these 2 in the main card opener, which is low-key one of the most important spots of a pay-per-view card.
I love that word, sludge. Nice one, Dan. Nolan, how about you, man? UFC 307, are you pumped? We did lose Movsar Evloev and Aljamain Sterling, and I know some of you are going to have a laugh at that, but listen, I kind of wanted to see those 2 kind of tangle, strategically on the ground. I'm a little bummed out. It's been reshuffled to 310 if anybody's wondering, but Nolan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird card, honestly. Like, I can't, looking at it, like I don't look at it and say, I think these fights are going to be bad or they're kind of boring, but there's a lot of name value, like a lot of notable names, but maybe I think when you have a pay-per-view where the main event, a lot of people, including myself, like I feel pretty strongly that Alex will win. And then the co-main event's a little underwhelming. And then, you got Aldo, you got Kayla Harrison, is probably one of the more interesting fights on that card. So I don't hate it. I mean, again, vets from start to finish. I was thinking about this the other day. We could have like multiple retirement fights to start the night. Like, we got Court McGee and Tim Means fighting. Court has lost a handful in a row. He's fighting at home. So, like, who knows what's going to happen there. You got OSP, who's, I think, kind of approaching maybe that as well. And then you got Carla Esparza, who's already said it's going to be her retirement fight. So we could be looking at the rare three retirements off the bat there. But I don't know. It's kind of intriguing. It's enough to catch my attention. A lot of vets. Is it the best pay-per-view we've ever seen, especially coming off of a spectacle like the Sphere? No, but I don't think it's the worst I've ever seen either.
All right. How about you, Goes? And let's not forget, Joaquin Buckley's also on this card. Granted, he's fighting a chess player in Stephen Thompson. So we'll see how that one plays out. I think it's not so bad, to tell you the truth.
It's not it's definitely not the worst card, but it's not the best card. But there is just no buzz going on right now. We kind of went off that high from the Noche card, but then college football came, right? And then NFL came knocking down the door. MLB playoffs are starting to kick up. Nolan MLB playoffs are when your team does good and they move on to the tournament. And then you even
Is
look
this
at
an
like
in-season playoffs, or is this?
and then you even look at pro wrestling, right? Like that Mr. McMahon documentary that's on Netflix. Like everybody seems to be talking about something else. The UFC needs to get on the promotion for this because they don't really have that bad of a card. It's a decent card, but you're going up against the juggernauts that are all these other sports and things that are going on. They definitely need to grab people's attention. And you have characters on this card that I believe can do that. Like when Kayla Harrison gets behind a mic, it's so much fun. It's great to hear the things that she says when you think about Poatan and the highlights that you can generate from that. I think the UFC needs to pick it up. They need to pick up the promotion because they have a decent card, but I don't know how many people are going to tune in just because of all the other options we have that distract us from that.
And Juliana Pena, man, she can run her mouth too. I'd put her in front of as many cameras as well, and get Pennington, going as well. Because when Pennington is pushed, she will clap back. That's your title fight. They got history from all the way from the Ultimate Fighter. I don't know. Like you're right, guys. There is too much content, too much entertainment out there to just let this thing get buried at the beginning of the week. You got to come in firing all those days so you can get people pumped up. I'm acting like I actually get a cut of the pay-per-view. I'm just trying to fire up our crowd. What does a win do for Pereira? Nolan King, what do you think, man? What kind of status does this elevate him to?
Just for the real, another show built around him. He'll maintain his status as one of the more active UFC champions ever. So again, I think he's on top of the world right now. Another win's certainly not going to hurt him. But I don't think it necessarily does as much as like if he were to be fighting, I don't know, Izzy again or so. I don't know. Again, this lightweight, light heavyweight, and middleweight's in a weird place. If Alex had fought Magomed Ankalaev, I think that would have been a stronger career builder for sure. But at the end of the day, he is one of the UFC's biggest stars, and the amount of time, the amount of title defenses, the amount of highlights, the amount of pay-per-views headline, it all contributes to him getting, to be onto the next level.
Dan, Tom, how about Khalil Rountree? This one's a big one for him. What would it do from him? And I'm curious. Have you shared time with him? Because it seems like I remember covering him at Tough Enough when we covered you. How well do you know this cat, and what would a win for him do?
I mean, not well these days and stuff. Like, we used to hang out back in the same, same hardcore punk clubs and going to the same shows and stuff when he was 300 pounds. And, I look like a Native American with hair down on my shoulders. That was another life ago. We're both, especially Khalil. He's really a different person now. You know what I'm saying? But obviously I've been following his career, and I do think it would be huge for him. I think it would be, as big of a Poatan Pereira fan that I am, obviously I would be so enthralled, so happy for my boy Khalil if he's able to pull this off. I think it's a great story, from whether you want to talk about, his father, his tragic passing, who managed Boys to Men, and that notable story, to the, the weight loss story, or any just like, the mental health story, doing it for the weirdos. And I mean that in the most endearing way as I raise my hand in that weirdo club. All these things, it would be so great to watch Khalil win. Poatan is 1-0 against UFC level southpaws. He's only fought 2 dedicated southpaws. If you go back to Thomas Powell and that knockout in the LFA, and I'll release my southpaw report again, a more detailed version than the last one from UFC 300 when he fought Jamal Hill for Alex Pereira. But he does look comfortable in these matchups against southpaws, though. So it's not going to be an easy night, that's for sure.
I'm glad you said that too, Dan, because if you'll recall, remember Gokhan Saki came over from the kickboxing world with a lot of accolades. So for anyone that says, oh man, this guy's a world kickboxing champion, because does Rountree want to stand with him for too long? It was Rountree that put him out, right?
Yep. Yeah. Gokhan was, granted a little more toward the end of his career. And Gokhan was a guy who, let's be honest, probably should have fought at middleweight. But that's an absolutely 100% relevant reference, though, George, that you got to bring up when breaking down this fight, right? Of course, Poatan is just massive. He's one of my favorite things, guys, on the internet, is watching Alex Pereira just take pictures next to people and making them look like they, you're taking pictures next to heavyweights and making it look like the heavyweights and middleweight. That's my favorite content on the internet right now.
Hey, Dan, when you have a guy that's just so good, so technically good, like Poatan, is it almost like their kryptonite when they go up in front of a guy that's almost like the reverse, right? All the different angles that Rountree throws from, the power that he throws from, everything's so unconventional. can that almost be like a scary thing? Because I kind of agree with you. I think this guy might actually have some moments in this fight.
No, that's a great point. Absolutely. From styles to even the stance, right? The southpaw stance can throw some fighters off, which is why I'll usually do those reports. But even with that, like to your point goes, facing a less not less seasoned striker, because Khalil's obviously seasoned, but like a non-traditional style, and more so to that point, Poatan in particular, he has a lot of comfort. He's kind of got a low-handed guard, right? Because a lot of his style is predicated on trap setting. He wants you to take that shot in, so he's got his left hook, he's got triggers ready, but it's a gamble, right? It's a high gamble, especially at this weight class. So for that reason alone, Khalil is a dangerous guy. I think the odds are like what, a 5-1 spread. That doesn't surprise me, but there ain't no way I'm betting 5-1 favorite in Poatan. Like it's dog shots all day at those odds. But yeah, I'd be leaning toward the champion. But to Goza's point, dude, we're gonna be flipping coins whether you realize it or not, folks. You're flipping coins in that fight.
Yeah, let's move on to the co-main event: Pennington versus Pena. What's the best result for this division goes? Because on the one side, Pennington would give stability, right? We haven't really kind of had that, I guess, since Amanda Nunes' long epic run. And then speaking of, if Pena wins, she's of the opinion that she might be able to fish out Nunes from retirement and maybe face her before we even get to the winner of Harrison and Ketlin.
Yeah, I think for the division, for the UFC, obviously, I think Pena is probably the better outcome. She's a great heel. A matchup with her and say Kayla Harrison, I think that would be phenomenal. Can you imagine them going back and forth? But you can't sleep on Raquel Pennington and just how bad she wants this. The heat goes all the way back to the Ultimate Fighter between those two. So you can't really counter out. But if you're asking what would probably benefit the division, the UFC, I think they want to see Juliana Pena come out of this one.
Nolan Harrison and Kellen Vera, is that the actual number one? Because I mean, it does look like Harrison's in that position to step in case one of the two in the main event can't go. So do we just call this an official number one contender fight now at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be, right? I mean, I think Kayla's just a no-brainer next. I think we were even questioning if maybe she would be in a title fight in her second UFC fight. So for me, I think, yeah, absolutely a no-brainer. I think it's super sellable, like Go said. If Juliana Pena wins and Kayla Harrison wins, that's a pretty promotable fight in terms of the lead up, in terms of the build, in terms of Kayla's story. And if Raquel wins, I mean, again, like I think Kayla Harrison going for the title is enough to sell, or I don't know if sell is the right word, but enough to, kind of promote and build some excitement around a women's 135 bantamweight title fight. And then who knows? I mean, Amanda Nunes, if she sees Kayla Harrison standing there with that title, is that enough motivation to see, hey, when I go to the negotiating table, maybe I can get some serious dollar signs to come back for one more and fight in what would be one of the biggest women's fights ever? I think it could be, in a year from now, we could be in a very interesting time at women's bantamweight, which is a place that we have not been for a while.
Mm-hmm. Who are you leaning towards, Nolan King, in the co-main event? Who do you like? Just a lean. I don't know if you turned in your pick yet, and I don't know. We can reserve our official pick till Saturday because we like to see them weigh in. We like to see them how they're comporting themselves on fight week. So what's your early lean right now?
I think for me, my early lean is Pennington, but it's kind of on a basis of like I maybe don't give her enough credit usually. So this might be like a reverse psychology thing going on. I might have to go back and think about it a little bit more. But I could also see her just playing the big spoiler of us, talking. We're MMA people that talk about MMA all the time. We know that the universe is going to let us down often. So, if people are excited about that Pena fight and the banter and the back and forth and a little bit of rivalry there, then I think the MMA gods will probably give us a little pushback and give us Raquel Pennington by split decision instead.
And what about in the main event? Who do you like, Nolan?
I do like Pereira, but like Dan said, I mean, this is it's an interesting matchup. Like when this was announced, I think my initial pushback in my brain about it was it was not something that I had ever thought of. And I thought that there were a couple of guys that had maybe done more to earn it. Like I think Ankalaev kind of got hosed. Granted, I don't know all the circumstances around that, but I am going to lean with Pereira, but I'm really excited to see it. I mean, in terms of just value and fun, like we're getting a kickboxing, essentially a kickboxing match in MMA between two guys that know a little bit of MMA as well.
I'm a huge Pereira fan, but I think Rountree is going to pull off the upset. and I think Pennington's going to win the fight. I think Pena's working off 2 years of inactivity, not fighting. That's a long time. And Pennington has gotten better than that mauling she took by Nunes in Brazil about 5 years ago. How about you, Goes? Any early leans from you?
I am kind of exactly in the same boat you are, George. I just don't know how dumb we might look come Monday because that script could be flipped so easily. But kind of for the same reasons, man. I actually like those two. Put them together in a parlay.
Dan, I know you're going to do a lot of work here for the website and on your podcast, but what are your early leans? And is it going to be hard not to choose your homie that you used to go to the punk concerts with in Rountree?
Listen, here's what you do. I'm leaning toward the favorites, and you guys can all, of course, get the details and the confirmation on my in-depth breakdowns at MMAJunkie.com as per usual. But I am leaning toward the favorites to answer your question. I will say this: if you're afraid of looking dumb, and you don't disagree with the favorites, but you're tempted on the dogs, or there's that weird chaos in the back of your mind, which Nolan's totally right to think about for that co-main event, you just pick Poatan, you play Khalil, and you win either way there, right? And in a weird way, whether it's your ego or your wallet. And then, who cares who you pick for the co-main event? But just if you bet anything, just bet that it goes to split decision. And then you'll probably be right there, regardless who wins. Classic WMMA split. But yeah, I'm also leaning toward Pennington, who to touch on a point Nolan made. I agree in the sense that Pennington seems to get really criminally underrated in general. She's done well for me, even though I picked against her last time and that didn't go well for me. Yeah, I hope she wins this time. And nothing against Juliana Pena, but my goodness, I'm just getting flashbacks between her and Nunes. And if you could get like the most two annoying, at least for me, the most two annoying ever post-fight interviewers, they like interviews or kind of personalities. No offense, I'm sure they're fine ladies, and whatnot. But my goodness, I want to just put a gun to my head and end it. So for that reason, I'll take Pennington, because if whether it's Pennington giving it to Harrison or whatever, if something lures Nunes back, I can't take a third matchup between Pennington and Nunes, Pena and Nunes, guys. I can't. So give me Pennington.
Goes. Kaylin Vera also has a background in judo, so that'll help her out a little bit for Kayla Harrison. But man, Harrison just keeps getting better and better. The way she thoroughly thumped Holly Holm was very, very impressive. You give Vieira much of a chance in this fight in the featured bout against the former two-time PFL champion?
I mean, I give her a little bit of a chance, but that improvement that we continuously see from Kayla Harrison and her mindset, I think is going to be very, very difficult to overcome here in this matchup.
Yeah, she is a bigger gal. She's strong, so we'll see how she can do with that. But man, I'm telling you, I couldn't believe how good Harrison looked the other day. Nolan, are you excited about Jose Aldo versus Mario Batista? Batista is also one of my favorite fighters. Everyone always, latches on to the champions or whatever, but I've been watching this kid for a while now, ever since he was on MMA Junkie with us, telling us how he used to work for Safe Light. He used to repair windows in the hot Arizona sun, and now he's a full-time fighter, but he's really a nice kid. I'm really looking forward to this fight, but who do you like in this one?
Yeah, I lean with Aldo, but I think Mario's earned for taking some of these fights that are perhaps the name value isn't there as much, fighting the Jonathan Martinez and the Mario Batistas of the world. But I love the fight. I mean, Mario's looked great in his last handful. Like you said, we've seen him kind of build himself, and it hasn't always been a straight line upward, but he's come out with a pretty good product that's not even finalized yet in himself. So I dig it. I think it's good matchmaking. I think it had to be somebody kind of in that range of fighters for both guys. So I'm here for it, and I think it's gonna be a pretty good technical battle.
Mm-hmm. Dan, we've seen Davis and Figueiredo win at 125, and now I think he's 3-0 at 135, and people are saying, hey, he should fight for a title. And then you hear about Henry Cejudo. He took some time off, came back, and he was in the mix right away. Didn't go well for him, but there's talk about if he were to go to 125, he could be in line for a title, probably off one win. It has something to do with these guys formerly wearing the crown, the belt, what they bring to the table. How about Jose Aldo? If he can knock off another guy, as popular as he is, could he sneak in the back door there and fight for a world title if he impresses against Mario Batista?
I want to say yes, but the thing is, I'm going to have some hope here because you mentioned Davis and Figueiredo. And by the way, I'm so pessimistic about matchups. I don't get excited for anything, whether it's because I'm burnt out or like the pandemic like means that we don't have like matchups until the day of sometimes, like even though I feel like we're still kind of in that mode. But Davison Figueiredo versus Peter Yan is a fight I've been calling for since before Davison Figueiredo even fought for the title at 125. Since late 2018, I've been calling for that fight. Finally, the matchmakers listened. I don't know if they're listening to me, but it's the right fight, even though they're about 3 or 4 years late. Other fights that they're about 3 or 4 years late was Jose Aldo versus Dominic Cruz, or they could have done Dominic Cruz versus Frankie Edgar, which was a fight that I was calling for as my bold prediction in 2015 to see in 2016 when we should have seen. We arguably could have started seeing the Edgar versus Cruz if Edgar would have came down a little earlier, like he should have, right, to bantamweight. The point is, the UFC matchmakers have missed so many of these opportunities. But the fact that they are now staying relevant to 307, doing old guy matchups, even when they're not glamorous, we go down to Tim Means versus Court McGee, great matchup. All 4 of those kind of matchups, by the way, matchmakers. Why don't we do that for our greats? What I'm saying, like whether Aldo can go to the title or not, I think he's got like the pass where we can give him a Dominic Cruz fight. You know what I'm saying? Like if Moicano can boost himself potentially to a title by beating an air quote top 5 guy to Moicano's own point, Dan Hooker shouldn't even be there, right? Speaking in hypotheticals here, well, why not give Aldo like the veteran kind of matchups? But instead, they gave him the title shot too early to said phenom Peter Yan, and he had to take like a ridiculous beating thanks to a ref who gratefully excused himself for the rest of the weekend. That's how bad that stoppage was. They wasted that. Now we're getting like these second, third, like I don't know how many lives Aldo has, but the UFC is damn lucky to have him. And I love Batista too, by the way. Shouts, great shout, George. But give Aldo something better. Give him something more meaningful, whether it's for a title or not. Make it make sense, UFC. Make it make sense. More bantamweight men's main events too, by the way. More of those.
Hell yeah. It's my favorite weight class. All right, guys, just to finish up, this past weekend had a lot of other news, we'll call it, right? Aside from what went on in Paris and aside what we're looking forward to this weekend in Salt Lake City, what would you like to highlight? Anything out there stand out for you, Goes, as we exit today's Spinning Back Clique?
I think Jake Paul kind of poking the bear, right? He does a great job of any time something's going on, he attaches himself to somebody in mixed martial arts. And in this particular instance, it was Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor doing that live stream. Speaking of bears, like at times looks like a grizzly bear and at times looks like Yogi Bear. I think at this time he looked more like Yogi Bear. And what that little sequence kind of told me was, boy, did Michael Chandler make the right decision. And I'm finally looking at a moment where I think we can all point and say this is the moment. I don't know that we see this guy fight again. And if he does, I don't think he comes back anywhere near who he used to be. So a little bit of two things there. But yeah, Jake Paul kind of poking at Conor and then Conor looking the way he did.
How about you, Nolan?
I think Diego Lopez announcing that he's going to be the backup for UFC 308, the title fight between Topuria and Holloway. Like what an absolutely, I wouldn't say necessarily unprecedented, but a really rare come up for Diego from not being in the UFC, taking a short notice fight against Mav Sarabolev, looking great. And then his first 17 months in the promotion, he's already found himself as kind of the guy that penciled in for the next title shot. So shout out to him. I think he's done a great job of connecting with the fans. His performances have backed it up. And he's a guy that took the long road to get to the UFC. You know, he had 20 pro fights before he got his first UFC bout. So I think there's something to be said in the day and age where guys that are 5-0, 6-0 are getting to the UFC. Like, you can get some, if you get that seasoning on the regional scene, you go through some of those tough experiences, you have losses, might end up paying off in the long term. So that's what we've seen here with Diego. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. All right, Dan, Tom, how about you?
I'll just give a shout out to my teammate Justin James. Those of you guys probably more familiar with him, the fights he had in the UFC. He's not there anymore, but that doesn't mean we MMA Junkie, we don't cover fighters outside of the UFC. We don't cover positive things. We do cover fighters outside of the UFC. We do cover positive things. And I know for a fact Justin was appreciated of our outlet for making sure that, you know, we don't forget about the fighters out there and seeing that we do, you know, giving our outlet some due daps there. So appreciations to Justin for that, but really the appreciation should go to him for what he did. Of course, similar to Diego Sanchez years back, for people who don't remember, Justin kind of fought on an event and did I guess for lack of a better word, kind of like a charity fight for a fighter who always wanted to, a guy who always wanted to fight a UFC fighter, right? So, or former UFC fighter, and Justin fulfilled that wish for him in beautiful fashion. What a gentleman.
Yes, check out the story on MMA Junkie. Just do a little bit of a scroll a few days ago. Beautiful story. Justin James just made that kid's day, his week, his month, his year. It was awesome. Extreme couture fighter. We've met him through covering him over there. Had a nice 5-fight run in the UFC. It didn't go his way with the wins and the losses, but still, that was his dream. It was to be in the UFC, and he made it. Yeah. So that was cool, and now he fulfilled this kid's dream. I'm gonna end with Kayla Harrison did an interview with Goz and I last week, and in that interview, like I say, she just oozes charisma, right? And a couple of times she's just kind of brushing her hair back, and talking about it's not the easiest weight cut. And I asked her, would you cut those beautiful locks of hair that you got just to make weight? And didn't hesitate, man. She's in. Sinead O'Connor, G.I. Jane, whatever, man. I hope Will Smith didn't hear me. I don't want to get slapped. But yeah, she will take it all off and go bald because she wants to be a world champion, man. So yeah, the interview's also on this YouTube channel. So subscribe to the channel. You'll get that type of content. Check out our 3,500th episode that Goz and I did for MMA Junkie Radio. It's also on this YouTube channel. So when you hit the subscribe button, you can just scroll back and see a lot of great content, a lot of great interviews, and you're going to see a lot of great content for this upcoming week as well for UFC 307. And also a shout out to Kevin Lee in his home state, got himself a quick win. He really wants back in the UFC. You can just see it. He says he's willing to go through Dana White Contender Series. He wants to get back in. I would say, though, as a 55er, the man's a beast. As a 70er, I don't know if it'll go as well, but he's just kind of a tweener in between the two. But it doesn't take away from the fact that quick work and early work this past Saturday. All right, folks, that's our show for today. Thanks to the guys. This might be my favorite panel. I hope they don't tell the others about that. But shout out to Kamikaze, who was our producer for today. He is also in charge of the cool graphic art. Don't forget about Goz and I doing the watch along on Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And our colleague, Fada Hanoun, she'll be doing a preview show at 5 p.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Pacific. And lastly, if it wasn't enough, pay attention. Today's the last day to vote for the World MMA Awards. We would love to get your vote for Best Media Source. MMA Junkie has been nominated for Best Media Source along with other outlets that cover the sport. We just feel like we do it better. And our guy here, Nolan King, is up for Best Journalist. So give him a vote. It's 23 categories that you can do this. You don't have to vote for them all. If you got a quick 30 seconds, boom, click, and you're out. Or if you want to take the time to do them all, you can do them all. It's quick. Go to worldmmaawards.com for that. And with that, we're out of here. Go out and be a champion. We'll see you next week.